My name is Amir Hassan. I am 29 years old, and on October 3rd, 2017, I died for 7 minutes after being shot during a robbery at the convenience store where I worked in Cleveland, Ohio. I was a Syrian refugee who had fled the war in 2015, a devout Muslim and the sole provider for my family. What happened in those 7 minutes changed everything I believed about God, salvation, and eternal life. In 2015, my world exploded around me in the city of Aleppo. The war that had been raging across Syria for years finally reached our neighborhood with a violence that no human being should ever witness. I was 27 years old, married to my beloved Layla, and we had just welcomed our infant son Omar into what we thought would be a peaceful life. Instead, we found ourselves trapped in a nightmare of constant bombardment, where the sound of fighter jets overhead meant death could fall from the sky at any moment. The bombing campaigns were relentless. Every day brought new destruction, new bodies pulled from the rubble, new families torn apart by violence they had done nothing to deserve. Our apartment building was hit 3 times by shells, and each time we survived by what felt like a miracle. The third time, our neighbors in the apartment below us were killed instantly. I still remember carrying their 7-year-old daughter out of the wreckage, her small body lifeless in my arms, and wondering how Allah could allow such innocent suffering. My childhood friends began disappearing one by one. Some were killed in the attacks, others fled the country if they had the money and connections to do so. Ahmed, who had been my closest friend since we were boys playing soccer in the streets, was shot by a sniper while trying to find food for his elderly mother. Mahmoud, who had taught me to pray properly when we were teenagers, died when a barrel bomb destroyed the mosque where he was attending Friday prayers. Each loss felt like a piece of my heart being ripped away, but it also deepened my faith in ways I had never experienced before. When life takes everything from you, you start clinging to faith harder. Maybe that's you right now, holding on to what you believe because it's all you've got. That's exactly where I found myself during those terrifying months in Aleppo. When the bombs were falling and we huddled in our basement with Omar crying from hunger and fear, the only thing that kept me sane was my prayers. I would recite verses from the Quran over and over, finding comfort in the familiar Arabic words that reminded me God was still in control even when everything felt chaotic. The war stripped away every comfortable assumption I had about life, but it also revealed the depth of my devotion to Allah in ways that peacetime never could. I began memorizing additional chapters of the Quran, spending hours in prayer and meditation whenever the bombing stopped long enough for quiet reflection. During the worst attacks, when the building would shake and plaster would fall from the ceiling, I would hold Layla and Omar close to me and promise Allah that if He preserved our lives, I would serve Him with complete faithfulness for the rest of my days. Finally, in late 2015, we made the agonizing decision to leave everything we had ever known and flee Syria. The journey to safety was almost as dangerous as staying would have been. We traveled at night through bombed-out neighborhoods, carrying only what we could fit in 2 backpacks with Omar strapped to Layla's chest. At the Turkish border, we joined thousands of other desperate families, all hoping to find somewhere safe to rebuild their shattered lives. The months we spent in refugee camps in Turkey and Greece tested our faith in ways that even the war had not. We lived in tents with no privacy, stood in long lines for food that was barely adequate, and watched our son struggle with illness because of the unsanitary conditions. There were moments when I wondered if we had made a terrible mistake leaving Syria, if we should have stayed and trusted Allah to protect us in our homeland, rather than becoming homeless wanderers dependent on the charity of strangers. But through every difficulty, my Islamic faith remained the anchor that kept our family together. 5 times a day, no matter what chaos surrounded us in the camps, I would find a quiet corner to perform my prayers. Other refugees would sometimes join me, and we would pray together for protection for our families still trapped in Syria, and for the strength to endure whatever trials Allah had planned for us. These prayer times became the most precious moments of my day, connecting me to the God I believed was testing us through these hardships. When we finally reached the United States in early 2016, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude to Allah for bringing us to safety. The Refugee Resettlement Agency helped us find a small apartment in Cleveland, Ohio, and I immediately began working multiple jobs to provide for my family and send money back to relatives who were still trapped in the war zone. Most days I would work at a restaurant during the morning shift, clean office buildings in the afternoon, and then work the late shift at a convenience store to maximize our income. The work was exhausting, and we faced discrimination from some Americans who viewed us with suspicion because of our Middle Eastern appearance and Muslim faith. There were customers at the store who would make comments about terrorists or who would refuse to be served by me because of my accent and my name. These experiences were painful, but they also strengthened my resolve to prove that Muslims could be productive, peaceful members of American society. Despite the challenges of adapting to life in a new country, I maintained my strict observance of Islamic law and practice. I continued praying 5 times daily, often having to find creative ways to fulfill this obligation while working. During my breaks at the restaurant, I would perform abbreviated prayers in the storage room. At the office buildings, I would pray in empty conference rooms after finishing my cleaning duties. And during the quiet late-night hours at the convenience store, I would read from my copy of the Quran between serving customers. Teaching our son Omar about his Islamic heritage became one of my highest priorities. Even though he was still very young, I began teaching him simple Arabic phrases and the basic prayers that every Muslim child should know. I wanted him to understand that even though we were refugees living in a foreign land, our identity as Muslims was something that no amount of displacement or hardship could take away from us. The convenience store where I worked those late shifts became like a second home to me. It was a small stop and go on Cleveland's east side, not far from our apartment. Most of my customers during the overnight hours were regular people, working class Americans who treated me with kindness and respect. They would ask about my family, express sympathy for what we had endured in Syria, and many of them became genuinely friendly acquaintances who made me feel welcome in my new country. October 3rd, 2017 began like any other Tuesday in my routine. I had worked the morning shift at the restaurant, spent the afternoon with Layla and Omar at a local park where our son could play and practice his English with other children, and then prepared for another late night shift at the stop and go. These overnight hours from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. were the hardest part of my schedule, but they paid slightly better than day shifts, and every extra dollar mattered for a family still struggling to establish financial stability in America. Before leaving for work that evening, I performed my Maghrib prayers as the sun was setting over Cleveland. The apartment was peaceful, with Omar already asleep in his small bed, and Layla preparing for her English class the next morning. I remember kissing them both goodbye and feeling grateful to Allah for the simple blessing of having my family safe and together under the same roof. After everything we had survived in Syria, these quiet domestic moments felt like precious gifts that I never wanted to take for granted. The store was unusually quiet that Tuesday night. Most evenings brought a steady stream of customers buying cigarettes, snacks, lottery tickets, and energy drinks. But tonight felt different. By 11 o'clock, I had served maybe a dozen people, giving me plenty of time to catch up on inventory and restock the shelves. During a particularly long stretch without customers, I went to the back room and performed my Isha prayers, the final prayers of the day that would complete my religious obligations until dawn. After my prayers, I returned to the front counter and opened my copy of the Quran to read while waiting for customers. I was working through Surah Al-Baqarah, the longest chapter, which speaks of God's mercy and guidance for those who believe. The familiar Arabic verses brought me comfort during these lonely overnight hours, reminding me that even when I felt isolated and far from home, Allah was always present with me. Around 11:30, I began to feel drowsy and decided to make myself a cup of strong coffee to stay alert for the remaining hours of my shift. As I was measuring the coffee grounds, I heard the electronic chime that announced someone entering the store. I quickly washed my hands and walked back to the front counter to greet the customer, expecting to see one of the regular night shift workers from the nearby hospital who often stop by for snacks and beverages. Instead, I saw a young man I didn't recognize, probably in his early 20s, wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt pulled up over his head despite the warm autumn weather. His hands were shoved deep in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he was moving in an agitated, nervous manner that immediately put me on alert. His eyes were darting around the store, looking at the security cameras and checking the parking lot through the front windows. "Good evening," I said in my most friendly tone, hoping to put him at ease. "How can I help you tonight?" He approached the counter without responding to my greeting, his movements quick and jerky. When he pulled his hands from his hoodie pocket, I saw the black metal of a pistol pointed directly at my chest. The sight of the weapon sent a shock of adrenaline through my entire body. But my first instinct was not fear for myself, but worry about what would happen to Layla and Omar if something happened to me. "Open the register," he demanded, his voice shaking almost as much as his hands. "Give me all the money. Now." I raised my hands slowly to show I wasn't going to resist or try anything foolish. The young man was clearly inexperienced and terrified, which made him far more dangerous than a calm, professional criminal would have been. I could see sweat beading on his forehead, and his breathing was rapid and shallow. In that moment, I felt genuine sympathy for him, wondering what desperate circumstances had driven him to this point. "Of course," I said as calmly as possible. "I'm going to reach for the keys to open the register. I'm not going to cause any problems." As I slowly moved my hand toward the register keys, I found myself thinking of a verse from the Quran that had always given me comfort during difficult times. "And whoever saves a life," I said quietly, hoping my voice would help calm his panic, "it is as if he has saved all mankind." That's from our holy book, and I believe Allah wants us to show mercy to each other. Instead of calming him, my words seemed to agitate the young man even more. "Shut up and give me the money," he shouted, waving the gun in the air. "Stop talking and just open it." I continued moving slowly toward the register, my hands visible at all times. But I could see that his panic was escalating rather than decreasing. His finger was on the trigger, and the weapon was shaking so violently that I realized he might fire accidentally, even if he didn't intend to hurt me. The situation was spiraling out of control, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I'm opening it right now, I said, turning the key in the register lock. The cash drawer began to slide open with its familiar mechanical sound, but before it had moved more than an inch, I heard the deafening explosion of the gunshot. The bullet struck me in the center of my chest with an impact that felt like being hit by a sledgehammer. The force of the shot spun me around and sent me stumbling backward toward the wall behind the counter. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, like a white-hot iron rod had been driven through my body. I tried to call out, but my lungs felt like they were filling with liquid and no sound would come. I collapsed to the floor behind the counter, my back against the wall, and felt warmth spreading rapidly across my chest as blood soaked through my work shirt. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear the young man's panicked footsteps running toward the front door. He hadn't even taken any money from the register that was now standing open, apparently so frightened by what he had done that he fled immediately. As I lay there on the cold linoleum floor, I could feel my strength draining away with shocking speed. My vision began to blur, and the sounds of the store around me became distant and muffled, as if I was hearing them from underwater. I tried to recite the Shahada, the declaration of faith that every Muslim hopes to speak as their final words. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. My thoughts turned to Layla and baby Omar sleeping peacefully at home, unaware that their husband and father was dying alone in a convenience store. I worried about how they would survive without my income, who would take care of them, and whether Omar would even remember me when he grew older. The thought of leaving them alone in this foreign country, still struggling to establish their new life, filled me with anguish even greater than the physical pain. But as my vision continued to fade and my breathing became more labored, I felt a strange sense of peace beginning to settle over me. I had lived my life according to the teachings of Islam. I had been faithful in my prayers and devoted to my family, and I trusted that Allah would receive my soul with mercy. My last conscious thought was a prayer for forgiveness for the young man who had shot me, asking Allah to guide him away from the path of violence and toward repentance. Then everything went completely dark, and the world around me disappeared into absolute silence. The next moment of awareness came with the shocking realization that I was floating above my own body, looking down at myself lying motionless behind the convenience store counter. Blood was spreading in a dark pool beneath me, soaking into my white work shirt and creating a stark contrast against the beige linoleum floor. My arms had fallen at awkward angles, and my eyes were closed as if I was peacefully sleeping, despite the violence that had just occurred. The sight of my own corpse filled me with confusion rather than fear. I felt completely awake and alert, more conscious than I had ever been in my physical life. Yet I was clearly dead. I could see every detail with perfect clarity. The way my name tag had been knocked askew during my fall, the scattered coins that had fallen from the open register drawer, even the pages of my Quran lying open on the counter where I had been reading just minutes before. Within moments, I heard the electronic chime of the front door as someone entered the store. It was Mrs. Johnson, an elderly African American woman who worked the night shift at the nearby hospital and often stopped by for coffee and a newspaper. When she saw the open register and called out for service, receiving no response, she walked around the counter to investigate. Her scream when she discovered my body was heartbreaking to hear. She immediately pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking as she tried to give the dispatcher coherent information about what she had found. I wanted desperately to comfort her, to let her know that I was somehow still present and aware, but when I tried to speak, no sound came out. When I attempted to touch her shoulder, my hand passed right through her as if I was made of air. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their sirens wailing through the quiet neighborhood as they rushed to respond to the shooting. I watched them work over my body with professional efficiency, checking for vital signs, attempting to stop the bleeding, and preparing me for transport to the hospital. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, kept talking to my unconscious form as if I might be able to hear her. "Stay with us," she kept saying as they loaded my body onto the stretcher. "We're going to take good care of you. Just hold on." If only she knew that I was right there beside her, following along as they rushed me to the ambulance. I could hear every word of their radio communication with the hospital emergency room. Male, approximately 30 years old, single gunshot wound to the chest, massive blood loss, no pulse, no respiratory activity. During the ambulance ride, I watched the paramedic continue working frantically over my lifeless body, performing chest compressions and administering medications in a desperate attempt to restart my heart. His efforts seemed futile as I observed from my position floating near the ceiling of the ambulance. There was clearly no life left in the form lying on the stretcher below me. At Cleveland General Hospital, the emergency room team sprang into action the moment we arrived. Doctors and nurses surrounded the table where my body had been placed, shouting medical instructions and working with the kind of intensity that comes from years of training to save lives. I could hear every word they spoke, see every procedure they performed, yet they were completely unaware of my presence hovering above them. The lead physician, a middle-aged man with graying temples, kept checking the monitors for any sign of cardiac activity while his team worked to repair the damage the bullet had caused. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, he began to show signs of frustration as their efforts produced no response from my body. "How long has he been down?" he asked the paramedic who had brought me in. "We found him approximately 15 minutes ago, but the witness estimates the shooting happened around 11:47 p.m., came the reply. "So at least 20 minutes, maybe longer." The doctor looked up at the clock on the emergency room wall, and I could see him calculating how long my brain had been without oxygen. Finally, after exhausting every medical intervention at their disposal, he stepped back from the table and looked around at his team. "Time of death, 12:03 a.m. October 4th, he announced with the weary resignation of someone who had delivered this news too many times before. The room fell quiet except for the sounds of machines being turned off and equipment being put away. A nurse gently pulled a white sheet over my face, and I realized that my earthly life as Amir Hassan, Syrian refugee, and Muslim father was officially over. The medical team began the somber process of cleaning up after their failed attempt to save me, their faces showing the professional disappointment that comes with losing a patient. But I was still here, still conscious, still aware of everything happening around me, according to everything I had been taught about Islamic theology. The angel of death should have come to take my soul for judgment. I should have been questioned by Munkar and Nakir about my faith and deeds, then taken to await the day of resurrection. Instead, I found myself floating in this hospital room, watching strangers dispose of my earthly remains. Suddenly, I felt an irresistible force beginning to pull me away from the hospital. It was not a physical sensation exactly, but rather like being drawn by a powerful current that I had no ability to resist. The walls of the emergency room seemed to dissolve around me, and I found myself moving rapidly through what appeared to be empty space. The movement accelerated until I was traveling at impossible speed through complete darkness. This was not merely the absence of light, but a profound emptiness that seemed to swallow everything around me. There was no sense of up or down, no reference points to indicate direction, just endless black void stretching in every direction I looked. As I continued moving through this darkness, I became aware of distant sounds that gradually grew clearer. There were voices, but not speaking in any language I could understand. Some sounded like weeping, others like calls for help or expressions of despair. The sounds carried a quality of deep sadness and longing that touched something profound in my soul. I tried to pray during this journey, attempting to recite Allahu Akbar as I had done thousands of times during my earthly life, but no sound emerged from whatever form I now possessed. The familiar Arabic words that had brought me comfort during the bombing in Syria, during our difficult months in refugee camps, and during the lonely nights working at the convenience store seemed to have no power in this realm. The darkness continued for what felt like an eternity, and I began to wonder if this was my final destination. Had I somehow failed in my devotion to Allah, despite my sincere efforts to live according to Islamic teaching? The thought terrified me more than the physical pain of being shot had. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn God's favor through faithful prayers and righteous deeds, and yet here I was in what felt like spiritual exile. But then, far ahead in the distance, I began to see something that changed everything. A light appeared, small at first, but growing larger as I continued moving toward it. This was not ordinary light like sunlight or electric illumination. This radiance was alive, pulsing with energy and warmth that I could feel even from far away. As it grew closer, the light became more brilliant than anything I had ever witnessed, yet somehow it did not hurt to look at directly. The warmth emanating from this light was not physical heat, but something that penetrated the deepest part of my being. It was like being embraced by pure love itself, a sensation so powerful and complete that it made every moment of happiness I had experienced during my earthly life seem pale and insignificant by comparison. As the light drew nearer, I heard a voice calling my name with infinite tenderness. Amir, the voice said, and immediately I knew that this voice knew everything about me. Not just my name, but my every thought, every action, every moment of joy and sorrow that had marked my existence. Yet there was no judgment in that voice, only love and acceptance that overwhelmed my understanding. The voice continued, "My beloved son, come closer." As I drew closer to the magnificent light, I began to make out a figure within the radiance. My heart stopped as I realized who was standing before me. It was a man with Middle Eastern features like my own, wearing simple white robes that seemed to glow with inner light. His hands bore unmistakable scars, and his feet showed the same marks of crucifixion that I had heard described in Christian teachings I had always rejected. This was Jesus Christ, and the recognition hit me with absolute certainty that shook every foundation of my Islamic faith. The presence of holiness around him was so intense that I felt my own sinfulness and imperfection with painful clarity, yet at the same time, I experienced complete safety and acceptance in his presence. This was not the weak, defeated figure that I had been taught to view with limited respect. This was the most powerful, most loving, most divine being I had ever encountered. This cannot be, I stammered, though I was not sure if I was speaking aloud or simply thinking desperately. You are Isa al-Masih, but the Quran teaches that you were only a prophet. You did not die on a cross for sins. You did not rise from the dead. Christians corrupted your message. Jesus looked at me with eyes that held infinite compassion and understanding. There was no anger or condemnation in his gaze, only love so pure that it brought tears to my eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ultimate truth, yet it was gentle and patient with my confusion and resistance. Amir, my beloved son, he said, I have always known you. I have always loved you. You have been seeking the truth faithfully, but you have known only part of it. Your heart was sincere in its devotion, but your understanding was incomplete. The love in his voice overwhelmed me completely. This was not the distant, demanding God I had tried to appease through ritual prayers and good deeds. This was perfect love reaching towards me personally, intimately, with a knowledge of my heart that surpassed anything I had ever experienced. Something deep within my soul recognized him and began responding with a longing I had never known existed. Jesus raised his scarred hand, and suddenly scenes from my life began to play out around us like moving pictures suspended in the air. I watched myself as a young man in Aleppo, faithfully attending mosque and striving to live according to Islamic law. I saw my wedding day with Layla, the joy when Omar was born, moments of genuine happiness and love that had marked my earthly existence. But then the scene shifted to show me moments that were more difficult to observe. I watched myself helping elderly neighbors in our refugee camp, sharing our meager food supplies with families who had even less than we did. I saw times when I had shown genuine kindness and compassion to others who were suffering, yet mixed with these good deeds were moments of pride when I had felt superior to Muslims who were less devout or knowledgeable than myself. The visions continued, showing me times when I had carried anger and resentment in my heart toward those who had destroyed my homeland, toward Americans who had treated me with suspicion and prejudice, toward God Himself for allowing innocent people to suffer in war. I saw moments when fear and anxiety had consumed me despite my claims of trusting in Allah's will. Most painful of all, I witnessed instances when people had come to me seeking hope and comfort in their struggles, and I had offered them religious obligations rather than pointing them toward the love of God that their hearts were truly seeking. My advice had been correct according to Islamic teaching, but it had often left people feeling burdened rather than lifted up. I see it now, I whispered, my heart breaking with recognition of how I had missed something crucial despite my sincere efforts to serve God. I sought to please Allah through my good works and religious devotion, but I never knew that His heart was already reaching toward me with love I didn't have to earn. Jesus nodded with understanding that held no condemnation, only infinite patience with my spiritual blindness. You worshipped the God you knew, Amir, but there was more to know about his heart. You tried to build a bridge to heaven through your good deeds, but I am the bridge that was already built for you. He gestured, and suddenly I saw visions that shattered every theological framework I had ever known. I watched Jesus hanging on a cross, but now I understood that this was not the defeat of a failed prophet as I had been taught. This was the Son of God voluntarily taking upon himself the punishment for human sin, including my own sin. The crucifixion was not a tragedy, but the ultimate expression of divine love. This was for you, Amir, Jesus said as the vision continued. Every moment of suffering I endured on that cross was because I love you personally. I took your anger, your fear, your pride, your spiritual failures, and I paid the price for all of it so that you could be forgiven and reconciled to the Father. Then I saw the empty tomb. The resurrection that I had been taught was a Christian fabrication, but now I understood that death could not hold the Son of God because love is stronger than death. Life is more powerful than destruction, and truth will always triumph over deception. I am not just a prophet sent to guide you toward God, Jesus continued. I am the way to the Father. I am the truth you have been seeking. I am the life that your soul has been hungry for without even knowing it. The weight of this revelation brought me to my knees before Him. Everything I had believed about earning salvation through religious performance crumbled in the face of grace that had been freely offered before I even knew I needed it. All my years of trying to prove my worthiness to Allah suddenly seemed unnecessary in the light of love that had been pursuing me my entire life. Jesus, I cried out, my voice filled with wonder and surrender. I believe you are the Son of God. I believe you died for my sins and rose from the dead. Forgive me for not knowing you, for teaching others to limit their understanding of who you are. Jesus stepped closer and placed his scarred hand on my shoulder. The touch sent waves of love, acceptance, and peace through my entire being. Amir, you are already forgiven. That forgiveness was accomplished on the cross before you ever needed it. You don't have to earn my love, you already have it. You don't have to prove your worth to the Father. I have already declared you worthy through my sacrifice. Maybe you think faith is just rules and regulations like I did for so many years. Maybe you've been trying to earn God's approval through religious performance, through good deeds, through following all the requirements you've been taught. But when I met Jesus face to face, I didn't find more rules to follow. I found love that had been pursuing me my entire life, grace that had been offered before I even knew I was lost, an acceptance that I could never earn but had been freely given. Ask yourself this question: what if you've been searching for God in all the right places but missing the person who was searching for you? What if the truth isn't a set of beliefs to follow, but a relationship with someone who already knows and loves you completely? As the overwhelming reality of Jesus' identity and love continued to wash over me, I felt a peace unlike anything I had ever experienced during my earthly life. All the anxiety I had carried about earning God's approval, all the fear about whether my prayers and good deeds were sufficient, all the uncertainty about my eternal destiny simply melted away in the presence of perfect love. I wanted nothing more than to remain in this place forever, basking in the warmth of divine acceptance. But Jesus looked at me with an expression that mixed infinite compassion with gentle determination. His scarred hands reached toward my face, and I felt power flowing into me that was unlike any earthly sensation I had ever known. It was as if lightning and warmth were combining within my very soul, filling me with strength and purpose that I knew came from heaven itself. Amir, my beloved son, he said with authority that shook the foundations of eternity, it is not your time to stay here. You have important work to do, and I am sending you back to complete it. The joy I had been feeling suddenly mixed with concern as I realized what he was suggesting. The paradise I was experiencing, this perfect love and acceptance, this freedom from all the struggles and pain of earthly existence, was about to be taken away. But Lord, I pleaded, I don't want to leave this place. Here there is no suffering, no fear, no confusion about who you are. How can I go back to a world where so few people understand the truth I've discovered? Jesus placed both of his hands over my heart, and I felt an even more intense surge of divine energy flowing through my entire being. You must tell them what you have seen, Amir. Muslims and Christians alike need to hear this testimony. Muslims need to know that I am not just a prophet, but the Son of God who died for their sins. Christians need to understand how much the Father loves those who have been worshipping Him through Islam, even with incomplete understanding. The mission He was giving me suddenly became clear, and I understood the enormous cost it would involve. To return to Cleveland and tell other Muslims that I had encountered Jesus personally, that He was indeed the Son of God, that salvation came through Him alone, rather than through Islamic observance, would mean losing everything that defined my identity and place in the world. My family will reject me, I said, my voice heavy with the weight of what this obedience would require. Layla will think I've lost my mind or been corrupted by Western influences. Our refugee community will view my conversion as the ultimate betrayal, abandoning the faith that sustained us through war and displacement. They will say I've sold out to American Christianity for social acceptance. Jesus nodded with understanding that showed he knew exactly what this mission would cost me. The price will be high, Amir. Your community will persecute you. Some will threaten you with violence for leaving Islam. You will lose your job when word spreads among the Middle Eastern business owners. Your family may be forced to choose between supporting you and protecting themselves from shame and danger. The thought of losing Layla and Omar, the two people who had motivated every decision I made and every sacrifice I endured, filled me with anguish that was almost unbearable. They were refugees in a foreign country with no family support system except me. How could I put them in a position where they might face rejection from the only community that understood their language, culture, and shared experiences? But you will gain something far more valuable than what you lose, Jesus continued, reading the struggle in my heart. You will have the certainty of eternal life with me, and you will have the joy of helping others find the truth that sets them free. Some will reject your testimony, but others will recognize my voice speaking through your words. Their salvation will bring you more happiness than any earthly comfort could provide. He gestured around us at the realm of perfect light and love that surrounded us. This is not just your destination, Amir. This is the destination I desire for every person you will meet when you return. Every Muslim refugee struggling with questions about why God allowed their suffering, every Christian who has built walls of prejudice against Muslims, every person searching for truth in a world full of religious confusion. I want them all to know that love is stronger than theological differences. As Jesus continued speaking, I felt my resistance to his mission gradually dissolving. The love I had experienced in his presence was too overwhelming to keep to myself. If there were others who could discover this same peace, this same acceptance, this same freedom, from the burden of trying to earn God's approval, how could I remain silent about it? I will give you supernatural strength for what is coming, Jesus promised. When you face rejection from your family, I will comfort you. When the community turns against you, I will provide new relationships with people who become your spiritual family. When you lose your job, I will open new doors for provision. And when you feel afraid or discouraged, you will remember this moment and know that I am with you always. The light around Jesus began to intensify until it became almost blinding in its brilliance. I felt myself being pulled backward, away from his presence, away from the paradise I had briefly glimpsed. The sensation was like being caught in a powerful current that I could not resist, drawing me back through the spiritual realm toward the physical world I had left behind. Remember everything you have seen. Jesus called to me as the distance between us increased. Remember my love for you and share that love with everyone who will listen. Tell them that the truth is not a religion to follow, but a person to know, and that person is me. The journey back seemed to happen in both an instant and an eternity. I was rushing through dimensions of existence that human language cannot describe, carrying with me the memory of divine love that remained crystal clear in every detail. The encounter with Jesus, his teachings about salvation by grace rather than works, the understanding of his true identity as the Son of God, none of it faded like a dream would have. Instead, these experiences felt more real and substantial than any earthly memory I possessed. As I approached the boundary between the spiritual and physical realms, I could feel my consciousness preparing to re-enter the broken body that was lying under a sheet in Cleveland General Hospital. Then, with a violence that shocked every system in my being, I slammed back into my physical form. The transition from the glory of heaven to the limitations of flesh was jarring and painful beyond description. My eyes flew open and I gasped for air with a sound so loud and desperate that it startled every medical professional in the morgue where my body had been taken. The medical staff rushed me back to the emergency room in a state of complete bewilderment. I had been declared dead for 7 minutes. My body had been moved to the morgue. And yet here I was breathing, alert, and showing normal vital signs. The doctors ran every test they could think of, expecting to find severe brain damage from oxygen deprivation, but the results showed no neurological impairment whatsoever. "This is medically impossible," I heard the attending physician tell a colleague. He was clinically dead. We documented cessation of all cardiac and respiratory activity. There should be irreversible damage, but his cognitive functions appear completely normal. As I lay in that hospital bed over the following days, physically recovering from my gunshot wound with remarkable speed, I wrestled with how to share what had happened to me. The memory of my encounter with Jesus remained vivid and unchanged, more real than the white walls and beeping machines around me. Every detail of our conversation, every moment of overwhelming love I had experienced stayed crystal clear in my mind. When Layla arrived at the hospital after receiving the terrifying phone call about my shooting, I saw in her eyes the same relief and gratitude I had felt so many times during our escape from Syria. She had nearly lost her husband and the father of her child, and Allah had preserved my life. At least that was how she understood what had happened. "The Imam came to pray for you," she told me as she held my hand beside the hospital bed. "The whole community has been asking Allah to heal you quickly. They say it's a miracle that you survived." If only she knew how literally accurate that word was. and who had actually performed the miracle. For several days, I kept my transformation secret while I processed the magnitude of what had occurred. I requested a Bible from the hospital chaplain, claiming I wanted to understand American culture better. Reading the New Testament with my new understanding was like discovering a completely different book than the one I had dismissed for years. The words of Jesus recorded in the Gospels matched perfectly with the character of the man I had encountered during my death. His teachings about love, forgiveness, and salvation by grace resonated with everything I had experienced in that spiritual realm. For the first time, I understood why Christians believed he was more than a prophet. I had met him personally, and his divine nature was unmistakable. After 2 weeks of internal struggle, I could no longer keep the truth hidden from Layla. I chose a quiet evening when Omar was sleeping, and we were alone in our small apartment. As we sat together drinking tea, I looked into her kind, trusting eyes and knew that this conversation would change our marriage forever. Layla, my beloved, I began, my voice trembling with emotion. I need to tell you what really happened when I was shot. Something I haven't shared with anyone, not even the doctors. She set down her tea glass and gave me her complete attention, probably expecting me to describe some medical detail about my treatment. Instead, I told her everything: my death, my journey through darkness, my encounter with Jesus Christ, his revelation about salvation, and the mission he had given me to share this truth with others. As I spoke, I watched her face transform from curiosity to confusion, then to horror and grief. When I finished my account, she began crying, shaking her head as if she could somehow make my words untrue through force of will. "This cannot be real," she whispered through her tears. "You are still recovering from trauma. The shooting has affected your mind. Jesus was only a prophet, nothing more. You know this, Amir. We've taught this to Omar." The conversation continued for hours, with Layla pleading, arguing, and begging me to reconsider what I was saying. She reminded me of our family, our community, the refugee families who looked up to me as an example of maintaining Islamic faith in America. She suggested that I keep these thoughts private, even if I couldn't shake them, for the sake of our son's future. But I could not compromise on what I knew to be true. Over the following weeks, as word of my strange new beliefs began to spread through our refugee community, our carefully built life in Cleveland began to unravel. Fellow refugees came to visit, hoping to convince me that Satan had deceived me during my near-death experience. The Imam who had prayed for my recovery now came to debate with me, using every Quranic passage he could remember to prove that my testimony contradicted Islamic teaching. I listened respectfully to all of them, but nothing could erase the memory of standing before Jesus and feeling his perfect love wash over my soul. No amount of theological arguments could diminish the reality of the paradise I had glimpsed or the peace I had found in his presence. The crisis reached its climax when I was summoned before an informal council of community leaders. They offered me one final opportunity to recant my testimony and return to Orthodox Islamic belief. When I quietly but firmly refused, explaining that I could not deny what I had experienced personally, they declared me an apostate and warned other Muslims to avoid contact with me. Within days, I lost my job at the restaurant when the Middle Eastern owner heard about my conversion. Other Islamic business owners in the community followed suit, making it nearly impossible for me to find work. Former friends crossed the street to avoid speaking with me. Layla faced enormous pressure from other refugee women who told her she must choose between supporting her apostate husband and protecting her son from shame. The breaking point came when Layla, with tears streaming down her face, told me she could not follow me on this path. I love you, Amir, she said, but I cannot risk Omar's future in this community. If I stay with you, we will both be outcasts. Who will help us if we have emergencies? Who will teach Omar about his Syrian heritage? How will we survive completely alone? The pain of losing my family was almost unbearable. Yet, underneath the grief, I experienced a peace that could only come from heaven. I had lost my wife, my son, my community, my job, and my reputation, but I had gained the one thing that mattered most: the certainty of God's love that could never be taken away. Several months later, an underground network of Iranian and Arab Christians in Cleveland contacted me after hearing about my conversion. Through them, I was secretly baptized in Lake Erie, symbolically dying to my old life and rising as a new creation in Christ. The pastor who baptized me wept as he heard my complete testimony, recognizing God's hand in every detail of my experience. I began meeting regularly with this hidden community of believers, many of whom were also former Muslims who had come to faith through dreams, visions, or encounters similar to my own. Together, we studied the Bible and supported each other through the challenges of living as Christians in a culture that often viewed our conversions with suspicion and hostility. My new mission became sharing my testimony carefully with other refugees and Muslims who were questioning their faith. Despite the constant danger of being reported to extremist elements in the community, I found opportunities to tell individuals about my encounter with Jesus, always emphasizing that God's love was bigger than religious boundaries. Over time, I have had the incredible privilege of seeing other former Muslims come to faith in Christ after hearing my story. Each conversion filled my heart with the same joy I had witnessed in heaven, knowing that another soul had discovered the truth that sets us free. I lost my community, my job, my reputation, but I gained eternal life. The Muslim refugee who died on October 3rd, 2017, is gone forever. I am now a follower of Jesus Christ, and I cannot deny what he showed me during those 7 minutes in eternity. You too can ask him to reveal himself to you. Look inside your heart right now. Are you holding on to religion, or do you know the God who holds on to you? The truth isn't a set of rules to follow or rituals to perform. The truth is a person, and his name is Jesus. 7 minutes in eternity showed me a lifetime of truth. And that truth is available to anyone who sincerely seeks it. This is what I saw, this is what I experienced, and this is what I cannot deny. Jesus didn't just save my soul that night, he saved my life, and he can save yours too.